Greetings, hungry nerds! 2020 Top 10 Comic Book Movies. Greetings, everybody. Welcome. This video, we're going to be doing another ranking. We're going to be talking about my personal favorite comic book movies of the decade, of the last decade, not this decade, because this decade just started. So we're going to be covering from 2010 to 2019, my top 10 favorite comic book movies. And no, they're not all from Marvel. Let's get into it. Coming in at number 10 is X-Men, Days of Future Past. The Fox X-Men universe, a true relic in our time. Now, I have a lot of issues with the Fox X-Men franchise and the way it was handled as a whole. But when these movies were good, they were really good, and I was into them. But, oh my god, did this franchise have some flops, especially in recent years. And the continuity over the span of the 18 years that this franchise was going were just horrendous. Yet this movie, Days of Future Past, this was a fun and entertaining movie, and it featured a lot of my favorite elements that the Fox X-Men franchise had. You know, you had a lot of the main characters from the original X-Men trilogy. You had Wolverine, Magneto, Professor X, and I feel like Days of Future Past does the best job of blending both the old and the new, because I do really like James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, right? I mix them up sometimes. Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy as Charles Xavier and Magneto, respectively, with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine being the catalyst, the time travel catalyst that bridges the gap between the old and the new characters. And while this film does have its issues, I feel like it's one of the stronger representations of the X-Men from the Fox universe, and just a fun, rewatchable movie. Coming in at number 9 is the DCEU film Wonder Woman. Now, I'll admit that I prefer the MCU over the DCEU right now, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy some of the movies that the DCEU are putting out, or that I'm immediately dismissing them. That's not the case. It's just that we've had so much more time with the MCU to let things develop organically. So, as with any DCEU film, I walked into Wonder Woman with a hint of skepticism as to what we were going to get. And in this case, with Wonder Woman, we got a great film, with the exception of the third act a little bit. It kind of fell apart for me by the end of that film. The villain that was featured was clunky, and we didn't really care all that much about it. It kind of felt forced, but the main character of Wonder Woman was great here. She's shown brighter than she did in her introduction in the DC team-up film, and the relationship between her character and Chris Pine's character was well done, and it felt organic. It's output like this from DC that gives me hope for the future of this franchise, that we could get better films, we could get more quality from this studio. Please, just give us better movies. Coming in at number 8 is Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, never have I fallen in love with a cast of characters that I knew nothing about than I did with the Guardians. At the time, this was the biggest risk that the MCU had taken at that point, and it paid off so well. This is such a weird, strange movie in the comic book universe, but it has so much heart, and you care so much about each of these characters. You care about them on their own, and you care about them as a group, as friends, when they come together. And they're all unique, and they have their own hang-ups and struggles that they each have to deal with, but they come together at the end, as unlikely as that is, and they save the galaxy. The villain in this film isn't the most interesting character. Ronan, he's kind of one-dimensional, but we do see our first glimpse of Thanos in this film, and the events that take place in Guardians of the Galaxy 1 kind of set the ball in motion for events that will take place later on in the Infinity Saga. And in at number 7, we have Iron Man 2008, the first one, the movie that kicked off the MCU. Now, I do have to say up top that I am tired of the superhero origin story. It's pretty much just cookie cutter. We're getting the same beats over and over again, but I feel like Iron Man 2008 gets it right. It's one of the best superhero origin stories put to film, in my opinion. We see Tony Stark, billionaire. He is cynical and he's got a big ego and he's selfish. He only cares about himself. But we see him broken down and taking a good look at himself and what he has done, what his company has done, and he just throws it all out the window. And we see him struggle with who he was as opposed to who he's becoming in later films, but it all starts here in the first Iron Man. And as far as superheroes learning how to use their powers, I think the most entertaining, aside from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, how he's learning his powers, how Tony Stark is learning his suit, and he's just launching himself all over his home into his expensive cars, and it's just a joy to watch. And while the villain in Iron Man 1 is a bit generic, as is the problem with a lot of the earlier MCU films, it's kind of just a bigger version of Iron Man. Jeff Bridges is great, and it's always fun to see him. Tony Stark built this in a cave with a box of scraps! Coming in at number 6 is Captain America Civil War. Now, when this movie first came out, I was absolutely blown away. Just with the sheer volume of heroes and just people fighting each other in this film, it was so good. It was amazing that they were even able to balance this. And we've seen it grow in stages in the MCU. We first had it with the Avengers, then with Civil War, and then so on. That the scale just keeps getting bigger, and we keep asking, how are they going to balance all these characters? But they keep being able to do it. But when I think of a comic book movie, I think of the airport hangar scene. Just what a joy it was to watch that. If I think comic book to film, I think that scene. It was just fun and exciting, and even though it's two sides of heroes fighting each other, Team Cap and Team Iron Man, just the banter between all of these characters is just unforgettable. I'm Clint. I don't care. I'm sorry about the bad impressions. I apologize for that. Since we're on the topic, though, the introductions of Black Panther and Spider-Man in this film were two of my favorite character introductions in the entire MCU, especially Black Panther. I feel like they did him better justice in this movie than they did in his own movie, although I did love the Black Panther film. I feel like they did his origin better in Civil War, and just his motivation and his character and why he's doing the things that he's doing. I feel like it's all done perfectly in Civil War. I just gush over it every time we see Black Panther the first time in the suit and he's chasing Bucky on the roof. I love it so much. Plus Spider-Man in the MCU. What's not to love? But probably the most important part of this film is how they deepen the characters and relationships between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark. How neither character budges from their values and what they believe in, even if it means tearing apart their friendship and the Avengers. This film doesn't have a giant otherworldly threat or a menacing villain. It's just a guy manipulating the Avengers from the inside out and tearing them apart. I love this movie so much. Coming in at number 5 is The Joker, the most recent film on this list, coming out in 2019. This is a really dark and disturbing film. This is a whole new spin on a comic book character, one who is twisted to begin with, but this film, it's just insanely dark and twisted. There are so many lines in this film that just strike a nerve and stick with you. This film is more of a character study, an artful one at that. It doesn't have all the spectacle and action that a typical comic book movie features, except we get deep into the mind of the Joker, and it tackles topics that you don't really see in comic book films, let alone big budget films in general, and that's mental illness. You empathize with the main character. Even though he's the villain, you feel for him, you understand his motivation, and even though you know that he's bad, you understand, and you almost not cheer for him, but like it's hard to like see what he went through and not blame him for the route that he took. Overall, this was an artfully made film, and one that's going to be discussed and argued about probably for years to come. Coming in at number 5, we have Deadpool. This is such a fun and simple movie at its core. Ryan Reynolds was 100% made to play Deadpool, and it shows in this film how much he cares about this character. When this character was first introduced on the big screen, they straight up disrespected him in XMen Origins Wolverine. How are you going to take a character known as the Merc with the Mouth and stitch his mouth shut? How are you going to do that? Now, while Deadpool isn't the first R-rated comic book movie, it kind of set the standard. It set the tone for where R-rated comic book movies could go in the future. It proved that these films could be successful and it could be the new norm. So this is just a fun movie that's easy to revisit, easy to rewatch, and it's just a joy to check it out every single time. And I can't wait to see what they do when they bring Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool into the MCU. It's going to be so good. It's going to be awesome. Coming in at number 3, we have 2 films. They're tied. The reason they're tied is because their stories interlace with one another, and the way I ranked this list, they hold the same weight, they have the same effect, so I'm putting them together, and that's Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Their overall story tie into one another, so in a way, you can count them as one big story. While one side of the story, Infinity War, focuses mostly on the villain, Thanos, who has been built up for years now. He's hands down one of the best comic book movie villains that we've ever seen. We empathize with him and we understand why he's doing what he's doing, and he believes that he's right, which makes him just downright scary. This installment of the MCU has some of my favorite action and banter in all 11 years that we've had so far. And at the end of the film, they take a major risk and our heroes lose. Not only do our heroes lose, but half of them get wiped out and turned to dust. Although we know over the course of it that they're not actually going to kill off Spider-Man and Black Panther in that way at this time when they're so successful right now. It was still shocking to see them just floating away into dust. And the way it ended on such a bleak note with that somber music playing in the background and Thanos just sitting looking over the sunset like he said he would. And then it just ended. That was good. Good job. Good job, Marvel. And then we have the second part of this entry is Endgame. Now, while this movie is a bit long and lags in some places, that final battle, one of the most epic battles ever put to film, some of the best fan service, so many moments of screaming in the theater. And after 11 years, the fan service in this movie is well worth it. Coming in at number 2, we have Logan. Oh man, what can I say about this one? This film takes the idea of a comic book movie and flips it on its head for a deep and emotional character study. And this film earns its hard R rating. It is bloody, it is violent, and it's everything the fans have wanted to see since Hugh Jackman became Wolverine in 2000. It's everything we wanted to see from a live-action Wolverine. This was such a rough film to get through for so many reasons, but it was such a well-made film. The performances given by Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart are not only some of the best that they've given for these characters, but possibly even their career. I remember when I was watching this film for the first time in the theater, and I just had a sinking feeling in my gut the whole time, and it stuck with me for a little while after. And that's just what I love about some films, is that they just make you feel things and they stick with you. So Logan definitely accomplished that. It just made me feel awful. And I love the soundtrack for this film too. It's really good. Before I move on to number 1, make sure you leave a comment down below and let me know what your top 10 comic book movies are of the last 10 years. We've had a lot of awesome comic book movies, and I want to hear which ones you enjoyed the most. So make sure you leave a comment, let me know. And on to number 1, we have the original Avengers, the first team-up movie of this caliber. Now, when I think comic book movie, I think of this movie. It's just done so well, and at the time, nobody thought that we could have such a team-up movie where we could have so many different characters like Iron Man, the Hulk, Captain America, and Thor come together in the way that they did, but it worked so well. Each character has enough time that we understand what the character's going through in their own individual arcs, as well as the arc of the team itself. All of their interactions are just so fun and entertaining, and nobody was really left out. Everybody got enough time so that we didn't feel like anybody was, being forgotten about, except for Hawkeye a little bit. He was kind of the bad guy for, the first half of the film, but it wasn't his fault. Loki had him under mind control. Hawkeye's really had it rough over the past few years. Overall, this film is one of my favorites. It stuck with me for so long afterwards, and I'm able to rewatch it no problem and still have an amazing time. And it's not too over the top at the end. The final battle, even though it's just so grand in scale, it doesn't feel over the top. And so that's my list of 10 of my favorite movies from the past decade, 2010 to 2019. Make sure you leave a comment down below. Let me know your list, or just let me know what some of your favorites are off the top of your head. Whatever you feel like leaving down there, just go for it, have at it, and let's have fun with it. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more. And don't forget to stay hungry, nerds. Goodbye, everybody.